This idea of it's really hard to be the top 1% in one thing. It's much easier to be the top 1% if you're the top 10% in 3 or 4 things, but where those Venn diagrams overlap in the middle there, if that is unique to someone in the market, now it's easy to be, again, top 5 or 1% there.
Howdy, folks. Welcome to Bruce's podcast. Today we've got Chris Wedding. He's a Duke professor, ex PE investor, and now runs one of the leading CEO communities in climate tech. So the first question for you, Dr. Wedding, is on your LinkedIn description, you describe your work as helping founders build companies without burning out. Why did you mention burnout specifically?
I think because, uh, growing a startup is a bit of a crazy job, and, often the odds are stacked against you. You can't hire the best people because you don't have the money. Raising capital is 99%, getting no for an answer. You have, often, tech challenges that are hard to overcome, and there's just a ton of stress on mostly your shoulder. So, look, I've interviewed CEOs, I've talked to CEOs offline, and I heard stories, right? I mean, in our CEO peer group, we've worked through, CEOs approaching burnout, how how to how to recognize it, how to kind of pull out of the nosedive. I've even heard of CEOs working so hard they induce diabetes, which is which is pretty extreme. So, look, I think it it's easy to believe that, a startup is a short period of intensity, but it's a long period of intensity, right? It's often whatever, 9, 10 years from starting the company to some sort of exit or dissolution. And so you can't burn out along the way, right? One of our CEOs to look at the sprintathon. You got to go fast for a long period of time. So how do you do it sustainably?
That's great answer. And I was wondering, you run a confidential entrepreneurs for impact. You run a confidential CEO group. What is something that founders consistently struggle that the outsider just will never see?
Well, I think it's easy to assume that a founder or CEO, because they have the power, authority, idea, skills, etc., that they can handle it all. Or you can assume, oh, well, there's a co-founder, or there's a good executive team, or there's a board, or there's investors, and therefore they have all the support they could possibly need. Or they got a, partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, etc. But the reality is, it's often that CEOs are talking about challenges with their co-founders or team or board or investors. Therefore, you can't rely on those people for certain topics. And even your close friends or partner or spouse, they love you, I hope, but uh, they really don't understand what you're going through. And so, who does? Well, it's peers that are going through exactly what you're going through. And this is not unique to CEOs. I mean, I think CTOs, COOs, VP of fill in the blank, the peer group exists supporting, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or millions of people around the world. They exist for a reason. Yeah, it's to kind of share best practices. Maybe it's hacking growth with warm introductions, etc. It's seeing patterns you can't see, seeing blind spots you can't see, and maybe a little group therapy along the way.
Uh, you've gone from private equity to building this CEO peer group. Is this the reason why you started to transition? You see that the real need for talking and expressing exists.
So after private equity we didn't raise a fifth fund. I saw a gap where a lot of founders didn't know how to talk to or find or negotiate with investors. So I got a bunch of securities licenses and became kind of an entrepreneurial banker, helping teams in climate tech and energy, et cetera. So that was the next step after private equity. But at some point, I said, "Look, I'm not a transaction person per se. I'm more of a relationship person, and I have a deep conviction mission for this topic since I was a kid, and so I should not just be making deals happen. I should be doing something else to advance this sector." And as fate would have it, one of my friends said, "Oh, you should come join the local chapter of our CEO peer group." And this is part of a global group called Vistage. The other kind of really big one's called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And so I, s- I knew from him and the CEO of my private equity firm who was part of YPO, I knew from them and others CEO peer groups worked. But when I went to this to try it out, I said, "Oh, they seem like nice people, but they're not my people. They're not kind of living the world or seeing the future I want to be working on." And so I didn't see it anywhere else in the US until I decided to build it. And that was late middle or late 2019. So that was the realization that I got a bunch of kind of training on the topic and then launched it in 2020.
Uh, so what are the differences between your CEO group and every other CEO group that you've been part of or existed?
Yeah, I think it's a number of fronts. One is we only focus on one sector. I mean, climate tech is not one sector, but you know what I mean? It's climate, clean energy, sustainability, et cetera. So that's different. The other difference is that we're capped on membership. So many groups, the biggest groups are, you know, tens of thousands of CEOs globally. And look, there's some perks to that for sure. But you know, my model is we're capped at 45 CEOs and 45 investor mentors. We're capped at 90, and across those 90, you know, people, there's some $40 billion of company value or assets to invest, you know, AUM. So I think kind of capping it is important. For some of the groups, there's no coaching component. For ours, there is. I have one-on-ones with the CEO. For many, there's no offsite, and for us, we do 4 offsites per year. For most, your CEO peer group is in your zip code, and for us, the peer group is across the US and sometimes Canada. And maybe it's time commitment as well. A lot of these groups are, you know, 10, 12 hours a month. I say we're more like, you know, 3 or 4 on average. I think the other would be that, CEO peer groups are for sure about leadership development, maybe kinda cross-sector learning, but what also happens here is business development. So one of our CEOs says, you know, "I have this advanced HVAC solution. Who knows somebody at these 3 companies?" Could be initial customer. And I'll put it out to our WhatsApp group, and guess what? We have 2 or 3 CEOs with warm leads. And so that okay, if that leads to, you know, a customer, then the ROI on them being a part of the group is pretty easy to calculate. I think those are some of the differences, you know?
Uh, you've been a huge fan of meditation. You mentioned in our class that you were going on meditation retreat right after this podcast. So you've been meditating for 25 years. What part of medication, uh, what kind of role meditation played in your career, and your personal life? I'm very curious.
Yeah. Well, one thing for sure, even though I've been practicing for 30 years, it has been sometimes on and sometimes off. It isn't like it's, every day for 30 years for sure. I think part of it was a very, uh, unforgettable beginning to learning these tools. So, learning with the brother of the Dalai Lama, learning from Paul Gapko, uh, another Tibetan monk had been in Chinese prisons for 30 plus years, learning from Thich Nhat Hanh, one of the most influential teachers in the West, being at the Tassajara Zen Center in California, the first, Zen monastery outside of Japan. Those are really influential early beginnings. But, like I have 3 kids. And so certainly when I had young kids and was working in private equity, yeah, there wasn't as much time to do the inner work. That wasn't the right decision, by the way. I should have done something versus nothing some days. And then in contrast, now our kids are 20, 18, and 14. And so I have all kinds of time outside of work. So, now it's whatever, 17 hours a week of meditation or other forms of reflection. I would like to believe it shows up in, at least for the CEO, coaching and facilitation, that it shows up in, deep listening, true curiosity, the ability to be a shock absorber for the stresses that they face. So versus amplifying their stress to, again, kind of absorb, some of that. I think to teach some of them the tools of mindfulness and meditation. Like we had a session on this topic, maybe 3 weeks ago, where I shared, 4 meditation tools and a bit about my path, and other CEOs shared how they apply this in their own, practice. I think it creates resilience. So you have been an entrepreneur in addition to being a professor for, I don't know, 16, 17 years or something. And guess what? Most things don't work out when you're an entrepreneur. And whether it's companies or initiatives or pitches or customer leads or huge deals, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, some resilience and, hopefully a better collaborator and partner and professor, because of those practices. I would like to believe. No.
I love your class because you not only taught us business, you taught us the philosophy of life and business. Another person you frequently mention meditating happiness was Naval Ravikant. This is something I will personally want to ask you. What is something that you mostly agree on with Naval? And if there's anything that you disagree with Naval, I would like to see your perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a minute since I've read the book for sure. I know we talked about some of it after one of our classes. I think, 2 things stand out without thinking. One is he has a line which says, more more entrepreneurs should hunt like a lion and not graze like a cow. And I think I'm guilty of this for sure, where it's like, oh, well, my working hours are X to Y. And I take X weeks off of vacation. And whenever I'm not doing those things, or when I'm not on vacation and I'm not outside of the working hours, I'm working. And I think that is grazing like a cow. And I think the hunt like a lion is, if we look back at some of the most respected thinkers in the world, most respected writers in the world, they might have worked half a day, in fact, there's a good book called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport, who's also the author of another book I love called Deep Work. But Slow Productivity, he's getting case studies of, again, of these household names in science and other fields where they just didn't work that intensely as we think about it today. So that's one. I think the other which I mentioned in class to you guys was this idea of it's really hard to be the top 1% in one thing. It's much easier to be the top 1% if you're the top 10% in 3 or 4 things, but where those Venn diagrams overlap, in the middle there, if that is unique to someone in the market, now it's easy to be, again, top 5 or 1% there. And so what I, the example I think about maybe that works for what I'm doing is, you know, if a customer, although I don't really call my CEOs customers, there's much collaborators and friends for life and customers, but if they value, PhD kind of rigor and private equity experience and meditation and AI, you know, relative expertise in AI knowledge and meditation and so forth, like where all those things line up in the middle, now I can be excellent in a very unique way. And so if they like it, they're in. And if they don't, okay, it's a big world out there. I just need 45, right? Or 90 CEOs and investors who resonate with that combination of things that I'm pretty good at, but I'm really good. I'd like to believe where they all come together. But that's a lot of hindsight also. That's looking backwards. Like I didn't predict this. This is the path to have all these four things become, part of what I'm doing.
This reminds me of the Steve Jobs book. When you look back, dots will connect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So you mentioned something, in hindsight. So you work with a lot of CEOs, probably hundreds of them. And you yourself have have moved between academics and business and private equity. So in hindsight, what are the factors that actually make someone really successful and really happy about their lives in the long term?
You're asking about like what I've learned or what I've learned from others. Maybe both.
Maybe both.
Maybe both. Well, that's the topic of a book, perhaps. So what comes to mind? I think it's hard to teach hustle, not hustle culture. It's hard to teach someone to be a self-starter, but boy, oh boy, is that such a huge skill. I was having a coaching session with one of our CEOs yesterday, and we were talking about send and delete people. These are folks where you send them something, and you can just delete that email because you know it's going to get done, right? Just initiative and agency. I think that's the trait. I think curiosity for sure. This is one reason that I love producing the newsletter and podcast each week. Is I get to learn so much in doing those. I mean, I was recording a podcast with the CEO of a company yesterday called Carba, and they've invented a new pyrolysis machine, which is basically burning something with no oxygen, but it doesn't combust. And they take waste biomass from forests affected by insects, and they produce a biochar or charcoal, which when applied to landfills each day, kind of covering it, it reduces methane escaping to the atmosphere. It captures PFAS and other chemicals as they leach down into the ground, and it's preventing the carbon in that waste biomass from becoming carbon dioxide and going into the atmosphere. And so we get to kind of geek out on like my chemistry minor from who knows 30 years ago. So I think curiosity is one. What else? I think ruthless time management, at least for what I do, is really important. Yeah, I work maybe 40 hours on average, maybe a few more sometimes, and plenty of vacation downtime. And I do a decent amount, but I think that's partly through ruthless time efficiency. And you might recall one of the documents I shared with the class was 10 ways to create 10 hours in your week. Like, can you really create 10 hours? Maybe, but it sounds good for sure. But yeah, I think ruthless time efficiency is really important. And then thinking about like a multi-decade plan, not a 2-year plan. I know that a bunch of your peers, let's say from Duke, will go work in some very, very obvious fields, finance or consulting, and cool, power to them, power to you. And many will say, I'm doing this for 2 years, and then ... I'm doing what I really want to do. That can work. But again, this kind of very long-term mentality, I think, is empowering. Yeah, and there's a lot more there, Bruce. But I know we're about out of time here.
Okay. So, curiosity, self-starter, and ruthless time management, long-term thinking. I guess we are running out of time, but the one last question I have for you is, what is your long-term goal? You're already a Duke professor. It seems like you're really enjoying your job. What is the next thing that you hope to work on? What is your long-term goal?
So a friend a couple of years ago said, there's two definitions of a serial. Well, he said, you never hear of a serial farmer. And what he meant was like a serial entrepreneur, right? You don't hear about a serial farmer. And about that same time, I read a book, I think called Company of One. But the idea of what came out of some of the reflection is, I think what I'm doing right now, this mix of video group, podcast, newsletter, teaching at Duke, and being on a few boards. Like, I feel like I can do this for another 2 or 3 decades, just like this. So I think that's the setup, and I think it allows me to have very deep impacts with VC and PE-backed CEOs, 45 of them. Median impact with 200 great students like you, and then much lighter impact with hundreds of thousands of people per year through my Coursera course or LinkedIn or podcast and newsletter. So it's like these three different levels of how I'm hoping to have an impact in the world.
If given time and options, and you will still do what you do, that's a very powerful statement. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the podcast.
Yeah, great question.